Emacs, disable some minibuffer messages. In Emacs, there are some cases where I would like to prevent messages from appearing in the minibuffer, mainly pertaining to beginning/end of buffer and text is read-only. Is there any way I can prevent these messages from appearing in the minibuffer? Also, is there some significant reason I might not want to disable these? At face value, I can just as easily look at the row number and buffer write status on the model line.
In Emacs 25, you can suppress minibuffer messages by binding inhibit message to a non-null value.
In Emacs 25 and probably in some earlier versions, the cleanest way of doing this is as follows. First, define. Then if you want to suppress all the messages produced by some function, you do. For instance, I suppress the message spell process killed produced by the function isPell_kill isPell in isPell.l.gs by writing. If you ever need to re-enable the messages, then run. A few of things to note. 1. All messages produced by some function will be suppressed, as will all messages produced by any Lisp function the function calls. Two, messages produced by C code will not be suppressed, but that is probably all for the best. 3. You need to make sure lexical binding column T- is contained in the first line of your .l file. But how do you find out which function called message? You could grep through the code as someone else suggested, but it's easier to let Emacs do the work for you. If you define and then do, you will get a backtrace added to the message. From this you can easily see where the message was generated. You can reverse this with an alternative approach would be to advise the message function and test to see if you want to print the message or not. This is simple if the message in question is a fixed string. For example, to suppress isPell process killed, you could define and then do. This approach soon gets very messy if the message is anything complicated.
You can sort of do this from Lisp code. Why sort of? Because message is a primitive, defined in C, instead of a Lisp function, and, per the Emacs Lisp reference manual, calls to primitives from C code ignore advice. Therefore, in order to really do a proper job of implementing the functionality you desire, you would need to redefine the message primitive as a Lisp function. Once you've done so, you can then advise it with code which obtains the string message would echo to the minibuffer, compares it with a list of messages you don't want to see, and then calls or doesn't call message depending on the result. In theory, this could be accomplished by, for example, defer message prem, symbol function message, and then, define message, format and amp, rest args, funcall message prem format args, but symbol function given a primitive argument returns something that isn't actually callable, so the funcall signals a void function condition. However, even if that worked, it still wouldn't really do the trick, because redefining a primitive only guarantees that the redefinition will be used when the function is called from Lisp code. Calls in C code may still use the primitive definition. It is possible for C code to call into Emacs Lisp, and such cases will see the redefinition. It is also Of course, possible for C code to call C code, and such cases will see the original definition. I'm vaguely contemplating patching the C code and recompiling Emacs to provide proper message suppression functionality. I don't really need that functionality, but it might prove an interesting exercise, especially since I'm not a C hacker. In the meantime, here's something I whipped up which, when dropped into a file, included from one of your init files, and customized to your taste, will suppress messages originating from Lisp code which exactly match the strings you list for suppression. As long as suppression is enabled, these messages will never appear in the Minibuffer. You have the option of whether to suppress them from the messages buffer as well. I've tested this to work with messages which are actually generated from Lisp code. For example, the you didn't specify a function complaint echoed by describe function when you give it an empty string argument. Unfortunately, the messages you mention wanting to suppress, such as beginning of buffer, end of buffer, and text is read-only, appear all to originate from C code, which means you won't be able to suppress them by this method. If I ever do get around to the source patch, it'll, probably, be against Emacs 24.3, and I'll update this answer with information on how to go about using it.
This works for suppressing beginning of buffer and end of buffer and doesn't require Emacs 25. Inspired by this URL but uses def advice for more compatibility.
If you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing.